On you go, Steve. Thank you.
Right. Well, sorry about all that, everybody. But here we are. Yes, climate change is something I've taken a great interest in recent years. When I was working, I never really had much time for it. I was too busy with agricultural biodiversity. But now, since retirement, I've really realised how serious it is, and that we really ought all to be talking more about it, which is why I'm here tonight. So thank you very much for being with me. And the first thing I want to do is find out how concerned you all are about climate change. So I hope Jeff will be able to do a little poll here online and ask this question. So I can't vote.
It's live now, and I can see people starting to vote. Thank you.
Right, that's excellent.
Two-thirds of people voted already. A very savvy lot, this, knowing how to vote on a poll on Zoom.
How many have we got? In fact, about 60 odd have we got?
57
online?
So far, yeah.
Right, okay.
Yep. Nearly all there, just 4 to go.
Right.
I'll just give it one more second, because most have now, and then it's kind of stopped at 54 have voted of the 57. Don't think it's going to change the result too much.
That might do then, eh?
Yeah, yeah.
So, very concerned, 87%, fairly concerned, 11%, not very concerned, 2%. Well, so as I rather thought and hoped, you're all very concerned, or nearly all. I just want to show you how that would compare with the national results, which are taken every 3 months by the Department of Business and Government. And that was the national result back in March last year. So we did have 80% either very concerned or fairly concerned. And that had been creeping up over the years. 15% not very concerned, and only 4% not at all concerned. So these are, I guess, what you might call the climate change deniers, and a couple of percent don't know. So already by last March, there were relatively few what you might call hardline climate change deniers. And then they redid the survey just before the COP26 Glasgow summit, and it had gone up quite markedly. This is a bigger jump than we'd had before. So there we got 85% either very concerned, and a big shift from the fairly concerned to the very concerned there, and a small reduction in the hardcore deniers. But I think we're always going to have a few of those, but they shouldn't be overestimated. So that's interesting. The country is then, you can say, aware and either fairly or very concerned. Why is that? Why aren't more people more concerned about what could be argued is the biggest threat facing humanity? Well, possibly the media have got something to do with it. This is a guy called James Delingpole, and as you can see, he's not very convinced about the science of it all. He used to write for the Daily Telegraph, actually. He left them, possibly was encouraged to leave, and joined the Sun. But it's not just the Sun. Oh, well, of course, here is his interesting solution to climate change. It's not just the Sun. The Telegraph is not alone amongst the what you might call the quality newspapers to have quite a lot of opinion pieces which, let's say, are somewhat skeptical. And this was just after the pivotal COP21 Paris agreement was signed. So claiming that the global leaders in Paris were driven by a primitive fear that the present ambient warm weather is somehow caused by humanity. That fear, as I understand the science, is equally without foundation. And who wrote that? Well. But mentions in the media have increased hugely in the last 2 or 3 years. And that's got something, I think, to do with the fact that there are more and more protests depicted here by young people, but it's not all young people. There's still quite a lot of people, people of my advanced age, turn out on marches and Extinction Rebellion events and so on. So that, I think, has had an impact. But of course, we've also had a lot of extreme weather events in London, USA, Canada, heat waves, wildfires, big floods throughout continental Europe, focused on Germany, wildfires in Greece, Africa, of course, suffering, and again, more hurricanes in the tropics. So a 5-fold increase in 50 years in extreme weather events. So I think that has got people thinking. But of course, the media did ramp up their coverage of climate change in the run-up to and during and after COP26, Glasgow, 2 weeks, first 2 weeks in November. But even then, in the run-up to that, arguably the most important conference that the UK has ever hosted, the Telegraph. So more skepticism. So to me, it's pretty optimistic that despite all this, the public are indeed concerned. They're aware that something serious is happening. And of course, it's mainly because of carbon dioxide, mainly from burning fossil fuels. Just want to show some maps of where it's mainly coming from. So which countries emit most carbon dioxide? Well, it won't be surprised to know that that it's the countries with the biggest populations, obviously, but also with China. You've got China now being the workshop of the world. It's doing a lot of manufacturing, and as well as being the largest population in the world. But you can see that the places that you'd expect, the oil producing countries, are fairly high, and India, of course, is high because of its mass population. But that doesn't really tell you about the potential for what might change. I think this is more interesting. So this is the per capita consumption based carbon dioxide emissions. In other words, it's the CO2 per person that is consumed in that country. So China, of course, comes out much, much lower on this ranking, and the big CO2 emissions are coming from wealthy countries, particularly those in the Persian Gulf. Actually, if you could see it, the United Arab Emirates is at the top of the scale. So people there are emitting about 15 to 20 tons of carbon dioxide per person per year, whereas in a lot of Europe it's around 5 to 8 tons, and in a lot of Africa it's a fraction of a ton, less than half a ton per person. And often when I talk to people about climate change, some people say, yeah, well, it's, there's too many people in the world. Yes, of course there are, arguably, for the environment. And it's those people, in countries where population is increasing rapidly. That's our problem. Well, this is the fertility rate globally. As you can see, the blue is arguably less than replacement rate. The light blue is 1 to 2 children per woman, and a lot of the developed world, the wealthier world, is in that category. The red and the orange is at least 4 up to 6 or even more children per woman. Of course, some of those die in infancy, but many don't. But all I want to demonstrate is that there's a large coincidence between these countries where the fertility rate is very high and you've got a big population increase, and the extremely low carbon emissions of those countries. If you remember back to the previous graph, these countries are only producing half or even a quarter of a ton per person, compared with 5, 10, 20 tons in some other countries. So, you know, they're not the ones that are going to make the difference. And really, it's a matter of how well off we are. So the poorest half of people in the world are responsible for only about 10% of global emissions, carbon dioxide emissions, whereas the richest 10% are responsible for half. And of course, we in this country are in that richest 10%. So the impacts, it's the IPCC that assesses what's happening. So these are scientists, scientists from almost every country in the world, and they spend a long time evaluating the data, and they all have to agree on it before they publish it. And in fact, their governments have to agree to that being published. So it's a huge bureaucratic exercise, and what they produce is fairly definitive, but often expressed in relatively cautious language. And so they express reasons for concern. And of course, extreme weather is a large reason for concern. Disruption of wildlife and ecosystems, impacts on crop yields, loss of coral reefs, melting ice caps, sea level rise and coastal flooding. All of this, which could lead, IPCC actually acknowledged this, could lead to mass migration. So reasons for concern expressed by the scientists. This is the World Bank, and are not an organization renowned for being left-wing sandal-wearing extremists. So they're estimating that there could be major displacement of people due to things like water scarcity, crop productivity dropping, sea level rise, direct heat stress on people, etc., etc. Some places becoming almost unlivable. So it's serious stuff. I just want to, there's too much on this slide, but I couldn't find a simplified version, so I'm just going to focus on parts of this slide. So this is what the IPCC have evaluated as the likely impacts and reasons for concern, and they separate out undetectable impacts at the bottom in white from very high impacts, which are in the purple colours at the top of each of these bars, and the grey bar across the two sets of bar charts is the 1 degree of temperature rise, and in fact we're slightly above that grey bar at the moment. I just want to look here at bottom left at the situation with warm water corals. So you can see the grey bar is already intersecting with a dark red. So that's a high impact, a high risk of death, basically, of warm water corals. And as you can see, if we were to get up to 1.5 degrees and certainly 2 degrees, we're into very high impact. The other one here that I just want to focus you on is coastal flooding. So as you can see, grey bar is intersecting with sort of orange colour. So that's moderate, getting towards a high impact of coastal flooding. And that's where we are at the moment. If you get up to 1.5, you're talking about well into the red, well into the high impact. So this is the way the IPCC evaluate what's likely to happen. I just want, because this is the Wharfdale Nats, obviously, think about biodiversity. How important is climate change in the threats to biodiversity? Well, I looked at the Environmental Audit Committee. This is a House of Commons Select Committee report. It's called Bloom or Bust. But they evaluated the global situation as well as the UK one. And they identified 5 main drivers, climate change being the third in the list. So changes in land use, sea use, that's things like deforestation, intensification of farming, and overfishing, etc., are the top cause of biodiversity loss, and also direct exploitation. But climate change comes in third there as an important driver of biodiversity loss. And that's because, obviously, of increasing average temperatures, direct effect on species, but also extreme weather events, and importantly, the changing chemistry of the ocean, the oxygenation and acidification, as well as increasing sea levels. So those are the things that are generally impacting negatively on biodiversity globally. In fact, last week, the government published a document which they are obliged to do regularly, assessing the risks. And I've just picked out the risks to nature that they identified. And they've said there's a high risk to freshwater species and habitats. There's a very high risk to natural carbon stores. And of course, peatlands are one of our major natural carbon stores. So there's a very high risk of loss of carbon and generation of carbon dioxide from those. Interestingly, they've put not known against risks to terrestrial species and habitats. I think that's probably quite a cautious estimation. Could biodiversity actually benefit? Because you think of all those nice southern and continental species that are occurring further north, and we're aware of that. Our recorders in the Nats have noted new species we didn't used to have, we now have here in Wharfdale. So that's nice. Yeah, there's no denying it. But of course, as we get warmer, those species that are on the southern limits of their range, particularly upland species, obviously, they're going to decline. It's most obvious in Scotland, but it will also be becoming clearer in the Pennines and throughout the rest of the UK. Of course, the onset of spring and other seasonal events is earlier, so that can disrupt things. Different responses, therefore, different parts of the food chain. Availability of prey, so caterpillars being available at the right time, the birds want them, etc., etc. And many species are just because of the pace of change, many species are unlikely to be able to adapt fast enough. And as I put at the bottom there, climate change has already impacted population of moths, explaining 40% of the decline, and of course, an increase in the number of aphids. That is 60% of that due to climate change. So generally, yes, there are some nice things about the climate warming, but generally it's very much a case of a negative impact. So what's being done about all this? The UK can claim legitimately to be a world leader, or at least was a world leader when our Climate Change Act was passed in 2008, making it a duty to ensure that the UK carbon account and this has been ramped up a bit since it was first enacted. It now says it should be at least 100% lower than the 1990 baseline, and that's overseen, monitored by the Committee on Climate Change, who also advise the government and tell them what their targets should be. It's an independent statutory committee, and it's chaired by the former John Gummer, who you may remember was, in his day, Secretary of State for the Environment. And its CEO is a guy called Chris Stark, who is a pretty well respected and intelligent guy. So internationally, the framework, the United Nations Framework Convention, is the main treaty that we in the UK and all other countries are a signatory to. And the COP, the Conference of the Parties, is the decision-making body of that convention. And as I've already referred to, COP25 was held in Paris in December 2015, and that was quite groundbreaking, that Paris COP, because all the countries agreed to keep temperature rise well below 2 degrees and to pursue efforts to keep to 1.5 degrees. And each nation submitted at that COP25 and committed to, in future, returning with what's called a nationally determined contribution. So it's requiring each country each time that they have one of these main COPs to come up with increased targets for itself. So yes, COP26 has taken place, and it was hoped that in Glasgow we would see that countries had come forward with much more ambitious targets, NDCs. This has been evaluated by an independent organisation called Climate Action Tracker. So in the run-up to Glasgow, could we say that the Paris Agreement was on track? Well, definitely not. Just a couple of weeks before the COP started, almost no countries were proposing enough. And some people noticed that and got slightly irritated and accidentally on purpose were overheard being slightly frustrated by it. Why can't they act rather than just talk, I think was what she was heard to say. So what came out of Glasgow? I'm not going to go through it in any detail whatsoever, other than to reiterate that the actual binding targets, the NDCs, were indeed very much inadequate, but there was progress, what you might call on the side, non-binding pledges made by different groups of countries about ending deforestation, cutting methane emissions, and so on. So there was some progress, but it wasn't anywhere near sufficient. And this is the Climate Action Tracker evaluation. Sorry, there's quite a lot on here. Let's just look first this. So that steep decline in greenhouse gas emissions is what should be happening if we are to meet the 1.5 degrees target that was agreed in Paris as to what the countries would aim for. Very steep decline starting now. The path, the trajectory that we're actually on is that very shallow decline there. And that is including all the, as well as official targets, all the side pledges that were made in the first week of the Glasgow COP. So even putting all that together, the unofficial as well as the official targets, we would still be heading for more than 2 degrees of climate change. And that's assuming that all those targets and pledges were actually implemented. So woefully insufficient progress. And really, the most important outcome, in my view, and I think in many people's views, the most important outcome of Glasgow was that they are going to reconvene. The original idea was that these major COPs were going to take place every 5 years, but they've actually agreed to come back in Egypt November this year with ratcheted up targets. And the UK remains the COP president until that Egypt COP27 opens. So we've got a vital diplomatic role to play in the next 10.5 months. And it's Alok Sharma that's still responsible for this. And Alok Sharma as a person was fairly widely respected and admired for the job he did. I think his problem was that he didn't get really sufficient support from across the UK government as a whole. But he said before the conference what would rank as success in Glasgow, and he said, well, it's keeping 1.5 alive. So you can argue that it's scarcely alive, but he's still saying we can keep it alive. But the record so far in the UK, it has to be said, is not all that credible. Ministers do like to say, they're always saying this, that we lead the world in the reduction in emissions. Our emissions are down 44% since 1990. But of course, that's partly because we've exported quite a lot of our emissions, because our manufacturing industry has declined, and we don't take into account aviation and international shipping. If you do that, emissions are only down 19%. I just want to illustrate, going back a couple of years, what the Climate Change Committee said to the government. And the Climate Change Committee, remember, have to be relatively diplomatic in their language. But only 7 of 24 targets were on track at that time. And this is what Lord Deben said at that time. And it did shake the government up a bit. So they did announce an increased ambition at the time that he said that. And since then, in fact, just before Glasgow, they eventually produced the long-awaited net zero strategy. And you can read there what the Prime Minister said in his foreword. He's obviously undergone a road to Damascus conversion from his Daily Telegraph article of 5 years earlier. So yes, we now have this document as to what the government is going to do to reach net zero. What do people think of it? Well, Chris Stark has to be fairly diplomatic as chief exec of Climate Change Committee, but he wasn't exactly effusive in his reaction. And of course, organisations like Friends of the Earth and Sustain, which is a consortium of a wide range of environmental groups focusing on food, did point out a major gap. And other people pointed out, obviously, various other fairly major gaps in that strategy. So the UK government is, let's say, somewhat lacking in credibility. This is what the Climate Change Committee said government ought to be doing. I don't want to go through all of this. I'll just pick out a few of the things that are more interesting. Reducing travel demand. Reduce demand, not just switch to electric vehicles, actually reduce the amount of travel going on. And how about buildings? Make all buildings energy efficient and low carbon, and enforce those standards. Agriculture and the land food production. Cut food waste. That's a big issue. Encourage a reduction in meat and dairy consumption. That is something that politicians hate to consider. Don't want to tell people what to eat, but the reality is that the food chain represents 30% of greenhouse gas emissions are down to the food chain, and meat and dairy are a big part of that. So can't be avoided, I'm afraid. Limit aviation growth, I put there as well. The other thing I just want to point out is the UK has a broader carbon footprint. As I've already said, it doesn't include aviation and shipping at the moment, but it should do. But it doesn't include imports. So the Climate Change Committee have said the UK must reduce consumption emissions, i.e. including those in imported goods. And that would make our emissions 50% higher than just our conventionally calculated territorial emissions. So why not commit to a consumption-based net zero? That is what I think would be the fairest thing to do. Well, if our territorial emissions reduced to net zero and the trading partners reduce their emissions in line with the Paris Agreement, then yes, UK consumption emissions would be around 90% below the 1990 baseline. But that means, as it stands, that we're proposing to rely on other countries almost completely decarbonising, rather than taking responsibility for reducing our own consumption of imports. So that is something to mull over. Is the way that our carbon footprint is calculated at the moment really fair? And the Climate Change Committee are saying, well, we really ought to be including all our consumption emissions, not just the emissions directly generated here, our territorial emissions. Can we afford? This is the line that a lot of skeptics are now taking on climate change. We can't afford it. Well, there's been various fairly convincing statements by people like this guy, who's the chair of the Office for Budget Responsibility, saying, well, basically, yes, we can afford it. And if we don't afford it, well, it's going to cost us even more. So early decisive action could halve the total cost. I just wanted to put up what you might call a more incisive strategy might look like. This is from Kevin Anderson, who is a pretty well-known climate scientist, and he's often fairly critical of his fellow climate scientists, actually, for not speaking out strongly enough. So these are his 10 points that he thinks this should be implemented. Immediate moratorium on all new fossil fuel developments, phase out fossil fuel production by 2035, but make sure that the people working in that industry are properly dealt with, or properly provided with other jobs. Immediate moratorium on airport expansion. That's pretty pertinent to Leeds Bradford Airport. Frequent flyer levy to stop frequent flyers, but still permit trips to see the family, etc., etc. We don't want to penalise those, but there are a lot of the emissions from aviation are due to a relatively small number of really frequent flyers. Move away from cars, including electric vehicles. Facilitate a major shift to active travel, obviously walking, cycling, and public and virtual transport. All new buildings to be passive house standard, so that's virtually zero emissions, and a major retrofit agenda. So that's something that is a huge issue. How are we going to get our existing housing stock to reduce emissions well enough insulated? No new fossil fuel power stations, and a massive program of electrification. So that's his more radical solution. That's what the government should be doing, in his view. What can we, as citizens, what should we be doing? Climate Change Committee have looked at the different changes that are required in order to achieve what they call the balanced net zero pathway. And that bit that's in dark blue, 41%, those are basically things that we as citizens are not directly implementing. So it's basically switching to renewable electricity, phasing out fossil fuels, etc., not things that we have a choice over, really. The yellow sector, the 16%, is largely behavior change, societal or behavior change. So those are things which we can choose to do or not to do. And that would include things like eating less meat and dairy, for example. And all the rest, the 43%, is measures which are a combination of societal and behavior changes and other technologies which are not down to our choice. So if you add together the 43 and the 16, so you've got 59% there, at least partly down to our choices. So we do, our choices do have a huge impact, and it's things like this, whether you choose to walk or cycle, whether you choose to minimize flying, etc., etc. Again, I don't want to go all the way through this. You can see that there's a lot of things there that we can do. I just put in larger text at the bottom, talking about experiences. I think, and many people think that there need to be much more conversation about climate change and what should we do about it, raising awareness, discussing the relative things that the relative importance of things and how we can maintain a comfortable life whilst greatly reducing emissions. There are other things highlighted here, like what we do with our money as well. Is your pension or your ISAs, is that being invested, for example, in fossil fuels or other unsustainable industries? And of course, because we're all wildlife enthusiasts, and there's such a strong linkage between biodiversity and climate change, obviously we need to continue supporting great organisations like the Wolfdale Gnats, and hopefully join its petitions group. I know Peter Riley will be very keen on us joining the petitions group, and of course the Yorkshire Rewilding Network, which Jeff Davitt is doing a great job on, and supporting Friends of the Earth and Greenpeace. They're all putting very effective pressure on government and industry to change their ways. I just want to point out also the Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill. It's a private member's bill in Parliament, and the Climate Change Act back in 2008 started off as a private member's bill. So this is a bill which will greatly strengthen the UK's commitment, and it will do things like switch to a consumption-based assessment rather than just a territorial assessment, and it will link climate change and biodiversity. So we all ought to be supporting that Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill. Just to finish off with, what's Climate Action Ilkley up to? Well, we've been in existence now for 3.5 years. We've got 120 odd members. We would like more. Got a lot of supporters, and we've organised a lot of talks. Raising awareness is one of our major ambitions, and we've attracted big audiences actually. We're talking to the schools as well. Grammar schools, very interesting. In fact, John Marsham, who's a climate scientist and one of our members, is speaking at the grammar school, I think, this week. We've worked a lot with Ilkley Town Council. We've, I think, benefited the neighbourhood development plan, which didn't mention climate change at all when we first got involved. We drafted the Ilkley sustainability plan, and we've sat on the climate emergency subcommittees of the council. We've bought actually 40 odd books on climate change and donated them to Ilkley Library, and they're now a special collection available for loan. And we've got a little scheme to reuse people's unwanted computers and phones and so on. We've split into 3 different action groups. There's an energy group looking at solar panels, insulation, heat pumps. There's a transport group, which I have to mention Helen, who chairs that transport group. Been very active, car-free days. We've had 2 of those. We've got a car club now in the town. We're promoting walking and cycling, and we've got 2 electric cargo bikes available to borrow. And I chair the Land and Nature and Food group. We've got a community orchard set up on 2 sites. We've got tree trails in Ilkley, a peat-free campaign. We join with the Nats and other groups to do balsam bashing, food awareness. We've got a significant project on the South Bank. That's the Playhouse Slope in Ilkley, and Save Our Swifts. And we've had great support and a grant from the Wolfdale Nats. So many thanks for that. So that's what Climate Action Ilkley is doing. And if you would like to join us, obviously, we would very much welcome you. So, in summary, it's serious. The weather is getting more extreme. The land, and importantly, the oceans are heating up. And it's wealthy countries like ours with the highest historic emissions who have been far too slow to respond, which means that now we've got to act quickly and radically. And before the Egypt COP in 10 months' time, our UK presidency ought to be persuading all other countries, all the major emitters, certainly, and supporting the smaller countries to commit to much more ambitious action. We are a world leader, and we have to set the best possible example, and we, as citizens, can play our part. So, thank you very much for listening. Sorry about the technical difficulties. I hope you could hear and see okay. And now I think I probably ought to stop screen sharing.
Thanks, Steve. That's admirable persistence through the technical stuff at the start, and also thanks to Helen for being the tech geek in the group who knew about why don't you try a different computer. Seems to have solved the issue. And I really like the global overview down to very local action, but also that one of the local actions we as individuals can take is lobbying politicians and influencers to make that global impact. So a real span there. We have a few questions in. If people have any more, please put them in the Q&A. So the first one, Steve, is kind of linking climate, biodiversity and pollution crises, because you mentioned eating less beef, lamb and dairy. What about chicken, which is often factory farmed, and fish consumption, which threatens fish stocks in the marine environment? How do we kind of navigate our way through the complexity?
Got to eat less of all of them, I'm afraid. Yeah, fish. Fish is a bit of a disaster, isn't it? And aquaculture, i.e. fish farming, now provides half of the fish consumed in the world. The Chinese do a hell of a lot of that, which you might think is, a good idea, but actually the trouble is feeding those fish. The oceans are dredged of tiny, young fish, anything that's dredgeable, in order to feed the fish farm. So, yeah, I'm afraid a lot of that is unsustainable. Yeah, the chicken and pork. There are a lot of issues. Yes, they're not ruminants, so they don't generate methane. So that is good as far as climate change is concerned. And that's why the finger is often pointed at ruminants like beef cattle, sheep, goats, deer. They're all ruminants. So they all breathe out methane. However, chicken production globally is almost exclusively highly intensive, and chickens, and to a large extent pigs, which are also generally kept very intensively, they're fed on a mixture of cereals and soya, generally soya beans. It is their major source of protein. And where are those soya beans grown? Well, traditionally soya is grown, yes, in places like Japan and China, but most of it is grown in Brazil and other South American countries. And where is it grown? Well, it's grown on cleared forest and other natural ecosystems, the Cerrado. So that's unsustainable, basically. The global, and quite apart from the direct impact of where that soya is grown, and indeed where all those cereals are grown, the way that chicken and pork consumption has increased and is still increasing linearly every year is completely unsustainable. There is not enough land in the world to grow all those cereals and all those soya beans to feed all those livestock, because of course growing food that humans could eat to then feed to livestock is highly inefficient. What livestock should eat is stuff that we can't eat. So I won't go any further into the debate about vegetarianism and veganism, I did do a talk on this about 10 months ago, and happily do it again on veganism. I'm not a vegan. I don't want everybody to become vegan, because there's an important role for livestock, but it should be a sustainable role where they are contributing both to agricultural systems, soil quality. A lot of crops grown continuously exhaust the soil. A lot of soil organic matter is at a very, very low level. If you have livestock in the system, in mixed farming systems, that's much better for the soil. So don't just think that because you switch from beef and lamb to chicken, you've done a great thing. Yes, you've reduced the direct methane impact of what you're eating, but there are a lot of other issues around it. There are other issues, incidentally, like antibiotics and so on, with intensive.
Let's leave them for another talk, Steve.
Yes.
Couple sort of link questions about influencing and lobbying. So there's the personal actions we can take about our diet and things. What about actively influencing banks, insurance companies, pension companies, as you mentioned, and or politicians locally and nationally?
Well, yeah.
That something we should be doing?
Absolutely. Yes. Banks need, they just need a light shining on them, basically, as to where they are putting our money. Generally, it's our money that they're using to finance unsustainable industries. So yeah, let's we in Climate Action, what I didn't mention was that we've had a bank switch campaign. So there are banks, the Co-op Bank is quite good. Triodos Bank is the best bank as far as not investing in unsustainable industries and positively investing in things which are going to do the world some good. So yeah.
And I believe
switch your bank account to something more sustainable would be a great thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, you obviously need to take advice on it, but I think I've seen that switching your pension fund can have 20 or 40 times more impact than switching your bank.
Yeah,
because of the sums invested and the decisions that are being made.
Absolutely,
so that's one people could look at.
Yeah.
We've run on a little. I'm just going to carry on a bit because we did lose some time at the start.
Yeah.
How can we ensure the changes that need to be made are made in a just and fair way?
Yeah.
That's an easy question for you.
Well, it's vital, isn't it? And you'll be aware, because it was covered a lot in the media, wasn't it? What happened in Glasgow was that the poorer countries were pretty fed up with the deal that they were getting and the 100 billion that they were promised, which they've never received all of it. And we are not going to reach a workable international agreement unless it's seen as fair. It's got to be fair and just globally. And, it's the countries that are in the front line, obviously, that you think about most countries that are in the South Pacific or the Bangladesh, which is largely at or even slightly below sea level. It's disastrous for them, and they're very poor countries. And they have to be allowed, first of all, the money to improve their standard of living without generating climate emissions, and secondly, supported to protect themselves from the impact. So yeah, it's absolutely vital that this whole thing is done in a just and fair way.
And the last one here, I think, then is kind of on the behavioural front. How do we encourage action when this is a absolutely crucial, but you don't necessarily see it day-to-day issue? So politicians' mailboxes have been heaving over the last couple of weeks over events in Downing Street. Whether you agree or disagree, people react, people contact their MP, they're incensed, all of that. For me, there's a bigger issue, but it's a slower burn. How do we get that same intensity of feeling and action needed on the bigger but slower issue?
Yeah. Well, how indeed? Ideas on a postcard. I mean, we just keep at it, basically. We don't give up, do we? You've got to keep on. And, I'm a recent arrival here. there are people who have spent decades campaigning for this and they haven't given up. I mean, I think the short term, you know, what I call the political sort of froth, things like Downing Street parties, yes, that's going to generate a lot of media attention while it happens. But, you know, I think we've reached a point now where climate change, like the BBC now, if you look at their website, they've actually got a tab on the top line, climate change. It's up there with, you know, global events. So I think we've reached a point where it's not going to go away like it has done repeatedly in the past. But yeah, that doesn't mean we can be complacent at all. You know, we've got to keep just keep highlighting things, just keep shining a light, make more and more people aware. And if lots of us are aware and we all do a bit of lobbying, write to our MPs, and of course choose who to vote for, that's going to keep the pressure up. So that's my possibly simplistic message.
Thanks, Steve. There are
We
various
all do
other,
something.
yeah, I think we're pretty much out of time. There are various other questions and comments about population numbers, which I think you touched on. Impact of pets, seems to see more pets around. How you compare changing your diet with driving less. You know, is there a eating less meat is like driving 20 miles less, that sort of stuff, what we buy. But I think we'd be here till midnight. So
well, yes.
Thanks from me, and I think we'd better pass back to Helen at that point.
All right.
Thanks very much, Steve. Thanks, Jeff. Steve, well, I guess you've persuaded us all that that it's serious and that things haven't really been going all that well over the last few years in our attempts to deal with climate change. It looks as though we haven't done anything like enough. I thought it was a fantastic selection of incredible graphs, actually, many of which I haven't seen before. Very, very clear. I love the one that you said was overcluttered, actually, with the various columns showing with the grey line intersecting with them, which was a lot of food for thought there, I thought, because one can see so clearly where we are already. And in some of the columns, it's a very scary place to be already. So I thought you did a fantastic job of just choosing the right, the right visuals there to really drive the message home. And I hope that a lot of people who've been listening to this will go away with renewed conviction, because I think you're dead right, Steve. The only thing is to just keep on being dogged and persistent, because that's how eventually these campaigns are won. It's tedious sometimes, you get fed up of doing it, you get fed up of hearing it, but there is really no alternative, I think, except to sustain the pressure, keep writing.
Where we get fed up with it is the point where, most people are then listening. So yes.
Well, absolutely. That's right. Those things are proportionately correlated in important ways. So a great message, a great talk, and I hope people are going to go away with, renewed resolution, renewed conviction, and we'll decide to do something, whatever it is: eat less meat, eat less fish, put in some time, join Climate Action Ilkley, whatever it may be, because of course every little helps. Just to announce the next talk, that's going to be in 2 weeks' time, I think on the 8th of February. That's going to be Linda Jenkinson talking about geese and wader spring migration. So that ought to be very interesting. And I hope that we'll see most of you again at that talk. And thank you all very much for coming tonight.